My name is Daniel Mercer. I wore the uniform for 11 years. I learned how to read maps, how to load a rifle without thinking, how to close a wound with a shaking hand and keep going. I learned faith. Faith in orders, in brothers, in the ritual of standing shoulder to shoulder and moving forward. What I didn't learn was how to come home to a life the way I left it. Not because the world changes when you're away, because some people change while you're gone. They call it betrayal. I call it the sharpest kind of learning. Leaving was a practice I'd performed more times than birthdays. The goodbyes were shorter for that reason. Less poetry, more packing. Claire kissed me at the airfield like someone trying to memorize a place. "Come home," she said. I smoothed my collar. "Always," I said. I believed her. It was easier than doubt. Our unit moved fast for 6 months. Convoy details, cordon operations, nights that smelled like diesel and dust. Captain Thomas Reeves. Reeves was the kind of man who walked like the room belonged to him. Smart, polished, an officer's officer. He would offer blunt praise after a hard day and a cigarette to steady your hand. You respect those men. You follow those men. Sometimes following is not the same as understanding. One evening, after a mission went sideways and we came to rest in a compound that slept like bone, I sat on the Humvee's tailgate and read the messages on my phone. There's a weird intimacy to a phone screen overseas, like a thin window to where the world keeps turning without you in it. Claire's messages were short and frequent at first. 3 emojis, a picture of our living room, a joke. Then nothing. Then the change. A new sender's name, then one that matched Reeves's first name. I shrugged it off. Men in uniform have to be practical about jealousy, but practical doesn't mean numb. Practical means you notice things and file them away. The way Reeves lingered in the chow tent. The time he lingered behind the briefing to ask about morale reports. The way he said my name like he knew the cadence of my life. When the deployment ended, I came home with patches of sunburn and a paper discharge. Claire was waiting at the gate. She fell into my arms and I felt a rehearsal of all I'd hoped. For a week the house was small and perfect again. I put my boots by the door and breathed. We planned for quiet things, dinners, a garden, furniture that wasn't bolted down for transport. Then the text came from an unknown number, a photo of Claire on a patio, a man's hand casually on her shoulder. The angle clipped the name tag on the man's uniform, Reeves. I remember the way the photograph looked, like a crime printed by a cheap printer. I remember the nausea like a second voice in my head. I remember not yelling. There's a moment where something that used to be you detaches and checks itself out. I walked into the garage and sat on the hood of the truck and turned the picture over in my hand until the paper was soft. I didn't rush to the bar or crash into a street of strangers. My dad had taught me to keep the work of cleaning to hands, not glass. So I called Reeves. He answered like a man who will always answer. "Dan," he said. "You back?" "Yeah," I said. "We need to talk." We met the next morning on base in the admin trailer. It was the sort of place that smells like coffee and compromise. Reeves wore a pressed shirt and a grin that tried to be casual. "You look tired, Mercer," he said. "Do you want me to be polite about this?" I tossed the photo on his desk. He didn't flinch. "It was a mistake," he said. "We had a moment." It meant nothing. "Your moments are with my wife," I said. He sighed, like a weary man explaining an economy he did nothing to make. "It wasn't meant to hurt you. When you're out there so long, people get close. Feelings are human. It's messy. Messy." The word landed like a verdict. "Get away from my family," I told him. "If this is part of the reason my life is broken, you'll have to answer for it." He smiled again, socketing charm like armor. "Do we have to do this like enemies, Dan? We're on the same team." That word team. God, how I'd believed it. I left without the clarity I thought I wanted. Men in uniform have different rules for the battlefield and for the neighborhood. In combat you have patrols and operations. At home you have choices and consequences. In my mind, the two sometimes look worryingly similar. Over the next 2 months I watched them like a man learning the timing of a clock. I learned Reeves's habits. He walked early in the neighborhood, his car parked around the corner, his laugh occasionally migrating out of my house like a ghost. I learned Claire's guiltful curiosity and her confusion. It was lonely, she told me at night, voice small in the kitchen. It just happened. For a little while that answered nothing and everything. But the world shapes itself into truth, one small fact at a time. Reeves made errors. He mailed receipts to the wrong place. He left things in plain sight. Men who are careful in the field have a habit of being careless where they believe themselves safe. He started to lift his mask in places with glass. One morning I found a folded note inside my work shirt pocket, something I'd worn just once after leaving the base. The handwriting was Reeves. It said, "Meet me. We'll fix this." The word fix sat on paper like an accusation. I could smash his face over a coffee table and make the world look right for a night. That would be loud. It would be violent. It would be irreversible. Instead, I decided to get loud in a way that couldn't be dismissed as drunken rage. I collected the ledger of truth. The texts, the emails, the receipts, things that recorded themselves whether a man wanted them to or not. I asked for CCTV footage from the building management at a time when Reeves allegedly stopped by. They gave me a grainy clip, 2 figures, a late hour, a hand on a shoulder. The faces were vague, but the pattern was clear. I used old habits, the ones that kept a patrol alive, except on a different scale. Surveillance isn't always boots in the dirt. Sometimes it's patience and paper. There's a careful cruelty to documenting another man's betrayal. You have to be precise in your anger. If you make a mistake, the mirror flips and you look petty. If you are meticulous, the mirror breaks with enough force to cut. I put everything into a folder and wrote a single factual statement. Not venom, not threats, just the facts in the plainest voice I could muster. I wanted to be a witness, not a messenger of hatred. I could have handed the folder to Reeves, to the base commander, or to a gossip column. I chose a path that turned the personal into public accountability, the Inspector General. In the military, the IG isn't mythology. It's slow administrative thunder. They hear complaints, they investigate, and they bind evidence into a chain that leads places you can't predict. But I also knew the IG's pace. It moves with paperwork and policy, not emotion. If I wanted faster change, I had to widen the net. Military channels, then civilian oversight. I contacted an old friend from the paper, a reporter who owed me a favor. Someone who respected documents more than drama. The plan had 3 parts: internal complaint, civilian exposure, and one final option, legal recourse. It wasn't about humiliation. Humiliation can be cheap theater. This was about making decisions have consequences that mattered in public record. When I dropped the file with the IG, I made sure to log every interaction. When I met the reporter, I didn't plead. I gave him facts. He promised to hold the story until the IG had preliminary findings. That was a gamble, one where truth and timing had to walk together. There's an animal in me that wanted to run to Reeves on a night and make him apologize or bend him. But rage doesn't have to be blunt. It can be clever. It can make the system do what it's designed to do, hold accountable. You don't file a complaint against a respected captain and not expect reaction. Stories travel quicker than paperwork. Reeves smelled it, and he fought it the only way he knew how, by trying to be untouchable. He smiled for cameras at ceremonies. He increased his presence at unit functions. He tried to be the man who could out-earnest the storm. Men that brave in public often hide a fragile nerve. Then the rumors hit my life. Anonymous messages. A scandalous email that had a photograph of me in a bar that I had never visited. A rumor that I'd been unstable. People I trusted shifted in their behavior. Claire was scared to walk with me sometimes. She said people stared. The world can be ugly when someone tries to reverse a story. The reporter said he needed more time. The IG asked for patience. I felt the net closing and loosening like a breathing animal trying to make its bed in truth and rumor. I learned the brutal law of accusations. Often the accused get to write the first narrative. The truth needs a speaker, or a chorus will drown it out. I became that chorus. The reporter called the day the IG issued preliminary findings. Reeves had been observed in a pattern of inappropriate conduct and misuse of authority. The IG couldn't publish the details until they had interviews and evidence, but there was enough to pause his command privileges. The base removed Reeves from duties that put him over subordinates. The paper's editor smelled a larger story. This wasn't only about an affair. It hinted at favoritism and misuse of position. Reeves responded in the way the skilled do, by weaponizing respectability. He released statements about privacy and personal matters. He claimed our story was a smear orchestrated by someone who resented his leadership. People relate to public confidence. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer's letters crawled across my mailbox like tiny accusations printed on expensive paper. But something else happened that changed the calculus. More people spoke. Quietly at first, I saw them. He asked me to change his log. He promised promotion if I'd... And then with volume. A corporal I'd trained came forward with an email Reeves had sent promising a deployment slot for loyalty. A junior NCO turned in time-stamped emails where Reeves edited another soldier's leave request to keep him in the unit. The pattern painted a picture. He wasn't just a man who stepped out of bounds. He'd been bending the rules, using power to keep his favors close. Each confession was a stone laid on a pile. Each stone made it harder for the story to be claimed as a personal grudge. The reporter published a piece that started with me but widened into misused power. Captain under investigation, allegations of nepotism, inappropriate conduct, and abuse of office. The headline was a rope you could hang the facts on. It pulled strangers' attention. It brought the kind of scrutiny that Reed thought his reputation could weather. And then the military moved faster. Once public, the IG's hands were no longer those of a slow animal. CID opened an inquiry. Personnel offices re-examined duty logs. The legal apparatus pivoted from administrative caution to law. What I felt then wasn't triumph. It was a strange, clear silence. The knowledge that a man I'd once trusted was about to discover that paper could be more dangerous than a gun. Reeves was suspended pending investigation. The unit received new leadership. Claire moved in with her sister and filed for counseling. People I thought would desert me did not. Others who whispered left the base. Life rearranged. If you've never watched a professional man be unmade by ceremony and documentation, you haven't seen real dismantling. The hearing was procedural and brutal. They read logs with voices like clerks reading inventories. They displayed messages, receipts, schedules. Commanders who once saluted him with full confidence had to sit and answer questions about why they'd signed off on certain transfers, certain reports. I testified. My voice was steady because the voice of a medic is used to calling time and action, not narrative. I stated facts. What I had seen, what I had documented, what I had given to investigators. When I said the name of my wife, I saw heads turn like crops in the wind. Reeves listened with a face like a man who expected acquittal. He had an army of people telling him that generations of service buy much. The pride of such men can be blinding. It was blind-colored humility, as if the uniform could overturn the ledger. The board asked Reeves about favoritism. They asked about a promotion he had recommended that benefited a close associate. He answered in the language of denial and plausible rationales. But the records were patient. They do not falter under craft. When the panel voted to strip him of command privileges and ultimately to file charges for abuse of office and conduct unbecoming, the room held its breath. The moment felt like a border crossing. One side was a man untouched. The other, a man whose power would not protect him against ink and oath. Reeves's fall was not theatrical. It was administrative and legal. He was not dragged out in handcuffs. He was served, removed, ordered to surrender command, and then escorted for the formalities of investigation. For all his charm, he could not charm the facts away. The civil world watched with the appetite of people who have read too many novels. Editorials spun. Opinion pages argued about privacy and loyalty and the nature of command. Friends who once admired him began to murmur. The faster the legal wheels spun, the less room there was for the myths he had constructed. Claire's divorce filing was final. She moved away with a clean line of possessions. She left a note that read, "I'm sorry for the wounds I made. I will make no excuses. I know you carry yours." I read it at dawn, coffee cooling on the porch. There was relief in the finality, even when the relief tasted like regret. Some men in our circle never spoke to me again. Some thanked me with the awkwardness of survivors learning new loyalties. That is the cost of truth. It remakes relationships in ways you cannot predict. Legally, Reeves lost rank, benefits pending decision, and he faced a board that could recommend penal measures. Professionally, he would be a scar on the service's record. Personally, his name would be footnoted with poor judgment and manipulation. That's what I wanted. Not his ruin for the pleasure of it, but accountability that meant his actions could not be repeated under the cover of command. There are moments where human beings crave a private turning of the throat, a quiet that ends an argument forever. I had in my head many ways to force that quiet. I didn't take them. Instead, I chose a confrontation that would be both private and public. A week after the findings were announced, I requested, through channels, quietly, the chance to speak to him. They granted it under supervision. I sat across a table in an empty conference room, fluorescent noon seeping through blinds. Reeves was thinner. The suit looked too large on a man used to a uniform shape. "You wanted to see me," he said. "I wanted you to hear me," I said. "I wanted you to know what you took." He met my eyes now without a practiced smile, and for a moment I imagined he saw his life as it must appear on paper, editions of deeds and misdeeds. "Do you regret it?" I asked. He hesitated, the sound of a practiced man looking for a script to recite. "Bad judgment," he said finally. "Mistakes. Your mistakes killed trust," I said. "You used your position like a ladder to cross boundaries between private and command. You made 'I'll help you' mean 'you'll belong to me.'" He stared down into his hands. There was a private gravity to the man in that small room. "I never wanted to do that to you," he said. It sounded like a child apologizing for breaking a neighbor's window. "You put yourself above rules," I said. "You made other people invisible when they weren't useful for you." He stood up abruptly then and left without another word. No fight, no confession. One man folding himself away like a book with a broken spine. I left that room feeling hollower than I expected. I wanted rage, and I had achieved something steadier. The knowledge that the life he'd built would be audited until the holes showed through. Time does the heavy lifting of healing. Not miracle, but habit. Months pass like measured steps. Work, therapy, long runs at dawn. Dates where conversation feels amateur and hopeful. I put a shelf in the garage and learned to plant tomatoes on a stopgap deck. There are small things that seal you back together. The way the dog barks when you come home. The way the sink is finally fixed and the house stops smelling of old war. I received letters, some scornful, some grateful. Men I trained wrote that they'd learned boundaries watching what happened and deciding to be better. That mattered. It is an odd currency, quiet return service. Reeves was eventually separated from the army with reprimand and loss of command, and later found work in the civilian sector with careful oversight and a diminished title. He would feel consequences in ways that no headline could fully capture. He lost authority. He lost trust. For a man who traded in authority, that was as severe as any sanction. I did not wish ruin. I wanted accountability, and I got it. The satisfaction was not a shout. It was a long, slow unhooking of power. He could no longer walk the rooms and make his choices into everyone else's obligations. Claire and I never reunited. Some things you cannot string back together without seeing the old cracks. There were dinners where we tried and failed, and both walked away with a gentleness that used to be burning anger. Forgiveness is different from forgetting. If there's one thing war teaches you, it's that certain truths are simple. Who will carry you when you fall? Who will stand with you in the cold? Who will take orders and will also take responsibility? The uniform can bring honor. It can also be a temptation. I tell this story not for pity or applause, but as a map. There are places where loyalty morphs into possession, where power becomes leverage, where love is used as currency. Those places need light. You might call it revenge that the man lost everything. I call it accountability. When those who wear symbols of power think themselves beyond consequence, they become the sort of danger a unit cannot afford. My mission was never to destroy him. It was to make sure he could not repeat what he'd done. That's harder than revenge. It lasts, a final image. I stand under a June sky, the sun balanced like a coin. The garden grows stubborn tomatoes. The truck hums when I start it, and the dog jumps into the back. There's still a scar on my palm from an operation, and there will be nights where my hands move the way they did under fire. But there's also the quiet, a life steady and testamentary. If anyone hears this and think,